The cold seized Elena Bradford's lungs like iron claws as she stumbled through the white abyss. Her worn traveling dress offering no protection against the December blizzard that had descended upon the Dakota Territory with merciless fury. She had been foolish to leave the stagecoach station in Rapid City when the driver warned of changing weather. But the telegram about her sister's illness in Custer had driven her forward with desperate urgency. And now that desperation had led her into a frozen hell where sky and earth merged into one screaming wall of white. Her fingers had stopped hurting an hour ago, which she knew was a terrible sign, and her legs moved mechanically forward only because stopping meant death, though with each passing moment that fate seemed less like a possibility and more like an inevitability. The horse she had rented had thrown her when lightning cracked across the darkening sky 3 hours past, bolting into the storm and leaving her alone with nothing but the small bag she had managed to clutch as she fell. Elena had tried to follow the road, but the snow had erased all traces of civilization, turning the world into a trackless wilderness where every direction looked the same. She was 23 years old, a schoolteacher from Ohio who had come west only 6 months ago to help her sister Catherine and her husband establish a new life. And now she was going to die in this frozen wasteland, her body not to be found until the spring thaw revealed her final resting place. Her foot caught on something hidden beneath the snow, and she fell hard, the impact driving what little breath remained from her body. Elena lay there for a moment, feeling the cold seeping through her clothes, into her bones, into her very soul. It would be so easy to just close her eyes and let the darkness take her. She thought of her mother back in Cincinnati, of Catherine waiting in Custer, of all the things she would never do, never see, never experience. A tear froze on her cheek. "Get up," a voice in her mind commanded. "Get up or die here." With effort that seemed to drain the last reserves of her strength, Elena pushed herself to her knees, then to her feet. The wind immediately tried to knock her down again, but she leaned into it, forcing one foot in front of the other. She could no longer feel her hands or feet, and her face had gone numb long ago. The small bag she carried felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Everything in her wanted to surrender, but something stubborn and fierce kept her moving forward into the white void. She did not hear the rider approach. The storm swallowed all sound except its own howling rage. One moment she was alone in the wilderness, the next a dark shape loomed out of the snow, massive and terrifying. Elena's scream died in her throat as strong arms caught her just as her legs finally gave out completely. "I have you," a man's voice said, rough and deep, but somehow warm despite the cold. "You are safe now." Elena tried to respond, but her jaw would not work properly. Her vision tunneled down to a pinpoint, then went black entirely. The last thing she felt was being lifted up, held against something solid and warm, and then consciousness left her completely. She woke to warmth and pain. The warmth came from a fire crackling somewhere nearby and the thick blankets piled on top of her. The pain came from her extremities as circulation returned, sending needles of agony through her hands and feet. Elena cried out involuntarily. "Easy now," that same deep voice said, and she turned her head to see a man kneeling beside the narrow bed where she lay. He was perhaps 27 or 28, with dark hair and eyes that looked almost black in the firelight. His face weathered by sun and wind, but handsome in a rugged, masculine way. He wore a simple cotton shirt and dark trousers, and there was something capable and solid about him that made her feel instinctively safe. "Your hands and feet are coming back to life. It will hurt for a while, but I have seen no signs of serious frostbite. You were very lucky." "Lucky," Elena managed to croak, her voice barely recognizable. "I was dying." Yes, you were, he agreed, reaching for a cup on the small table beside the bed. But you are not dying now. Here, drink this. Slowly. He helped her sit up enough to sip from the cup. The liquid was warm broth, rich and salty, and it was the most wonderful thing Elena had ever tasted. She wanted to gulp it down, but he made her take small sips, patient and steady. "What is your name?" he asked after she had drunk about half the cup. "Elena Bradford," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I was traveling from Rapid City to Custer when the storm hit. My horse threw me and ran off." His expression darkened. "You were alone, on horseback in this weather. I had to get to Custer. My sister is ill." Elena looked around the small cabin, noting the rough-hewn walls, the simple furnishings, the snow still visible through the cracks around the shuttered window. "Where am I?" "About 15 miles south of Custer, in the foothills of the Black Hills," he said. "This is my winter line cabin. I was checking on cattle when I saw you in the storm. My name is Wyatt Tanner. I run cattle for the Double Bar Ranch." "A cowboy," Elena murmured, taking another sip of broth. The warmth was spreading through her now, driving back the terrible cold that had invaded her core. "You saved my life." "Any man would have done the same," Wyatt said, but Elena saw something in his eyes that made her think he did not quite believe that. "The storm is still raging outside. We will be trapped here until it passes, maybe a day or two depending on how much snow falls. There is food enough and firewood, and the cabin is sound. You are safe here, Miss Bradford." The use of her formal name reminded Elena suddenly that she was alone in a cabin with a man she did not know, wearing nothing but her chemise and drawers beneath the blankets. Her dress and other clothes were hanging near the fire, steaming slightly. Color flooded her face. Wyatt saw her expression and stood, moving back to give her space. "I apologize for the impropriety, but your clothes were soaked through. You would have died if I had not removed them and warmed you up. I swear to you on my honor that I conducted myself as a gentleman." There was something in his tone, a quiet dignity and sincerity that made Elena believe him completely. "I know," she said softly. "Thank you for everything." He nodded once, then turned away to tend the fire, giving her privacy to collect herself. Elena lay back against the thin pillow, feeling the pain in her extremities gradually fade to a dull ache. She was alive. Against all odds, in the middle of a Dakota blizzard, a cowboy had found her and brought her to safety. She looked at Wyatt's broad back as he poked at the fire, and felt something stir in her chest that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the way his presence seemed to fill the small cabin with a sense of security and strength. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, rattling the shutters and screaming around the eaves. Inside, the fire crackled and warmth held back the killing cold. Elena closed her eyes and let herself simply feel grateful to be alive. When she woke again, it was to the smell of cooking meat. Elena sat up carefully, relieved to find that her hands and feet, while still tender, no longer hurt with that terrible burning sensation. Her dress had been laid over the back of a chair near the bed, dry now and roughly folded. Wyatt stood at the small iron stove in the corner, tending a pan. "Your clothes are dry," he said without turning around, somehow sensing she was awake. "There is a blanket on the chair you can wrap around yourself for modesty if you wish to dress." Elena did exactly that, taking the thick wool blanket and creating a makeshift screen while she quickly pulled on her clothes. The fabric was warm from the fire and felt wonderful against her skin. When she was dressed, she folded the blanket and moved to sit in the cabin's one other chair, a rough wooden thing that nonetheless felt luxurious after the ordeal she had been through. Wyatt served her a plate of fried salt pork and beans, simple fare but perfectly cooked. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the storm continuing its assault on the cabin walls. Elena studied her rescuer as she ate, noting the way his hands moved with practiced economy, the quiet confidence in his bearing, the occasional glance he cast her way when he thought she was not looking. "How long have you been a cowboy?" she asked finally, breaking the silence. Wyatt looked up from his plate, seeming surprised by the question. "Since I was 16, he said. 12 years now. I started working ranches in Texas after my parents died of fever, worked my way north over the years, ended up here in Dakota Territory 3 years back. The double bar is good outfit, fair pay, and decent treatment. You have family elsewhere." "No one," he said simply. "My parents were only children and I had no siblings. The ranch hands are the closest thing I have to family now." Elena heard the loneliness beneath his matter-of-fact words and felt an unexpected kinship. "I understand something of that," she said softly. "My father died when I was young, and my mother remarried a man who made it clear that Catherine and I were burdens. When Catherine married Jacob and came west, I stayed behind to finish my teaching certificate, but Ohio never felt like home. When they sent for me, I came as quickly as I could. They are waiting for you in Custer." "Yes." Catherine wrote that she had taken ill, some kind of lung ailment. "She wanted me with her." Elena felt worry clench her stomach. "They will be frantic when I do not arrive. The stage-coach station knew I was riding to Custer. When the storm clears, I will take you to town myself," Wyatt promised. "We will make your sister understand what happened. She will be grateful you are alive." "Thanks to you," Elena said, meeting his eyes. In the firelight they were not black as she had first thought, but a deep brown, warm and steady. "I still cannot believe you found me out there. What were you doing in the storm?" Wyatt looked uncomfortable. "I had a feeling," he said finally. "The cattle were all accounted for and safe in the canyon where we winter them, but I had this feeling that I needed to ride out, check the line cabin before the storm hit too hard. My foreman thought I was crazy, but I could not shake it." He shook his head. "I do not usually put stock in such things, but I am glad I listened to it this time." "A miracle," Elena breathed. "It must have been a miracle." "Maybe," Wyatt allowed. "Or maybe just luck. Either way, I am glad I found you, Miss Bradford." "Elena," she said impulsively. "Please call me Elena." "I think you have earned the right, considering you saved my life." A small smile touched his lips, transforming his serious face into something almost boyish. "Elena, then, and you can call me Wyatt." The storm raged for 2 full days and nights. During that time, Elena and Wyatt existed in a strange bubble of enforced intimacy, trapped together in the small cabin while nature displayed its fury outside. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their lives, their hopes, their fears. Elena told him about her love of teaching, about the children in her small schoolhouse in Ohio who had cried when she left. Wyatt told her about the freedom of the open range, about sleeping under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch, about the satisfaction of honest work with one's hands. They also shared the practical tasks of survival. Wyatt taught Elena how to properly bank a fire so it would last through the night, how to melt snow for water, how to make coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Elena taught him the proper pronunciation of Latin words she had learned in school, laughed at his attempts to repeat them, and told him stories of ancient Rome and Greece that he listened to with rapt attention. On the second night, as they sat by the fire after their simple dinner, Wyatt pulled out a harmonica and began to play. The notes were sweet and melancholy, filling the cabin with music that somehow made Elena's heart ache and soar at the same time. When he finished, she applauded softly. "That was beautiful," she said. "Where did you learn to play?" "My mother taught me," Wyatt said, turning the harmonica over in his hands. It was hers, one of the few things I have from my life before. He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw a vulnerability that made her breath catch. I have not played for anyone in a long time. I am honored that you played for me, Elena said softly. The space between them seemed to crackle with something that had nothing to do with the fire. She found herself leaning forward, drawn by some invisible force. Wyatt set the harmonica aside and leaned forward as well, closing the distance between their chairs. "Elena," he said, his voice rough with some emotion she could not name. "These past 2 days, talking with you, being with you, I have felt something I never expected to feel." "What is that?" Elena whispered, her heart pounding. "Hope," Wyatt said simply. "You asked me once why I was out in that storm. The truth is, I think I was looking for something without knowing what it was. And then I found you, dying in the snow, and everything changed. You became my purpose in that moment. Saving you, keeping you alive, it gave me something I had not realized I was missing." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. "You became my hope," she said. "When I was lost in that storm with no hope of survival, you appeared like an answer to a prayer I did not even know I was praying. You saved more than my life, Wyatt. You saved me from a loneliness I have carried for so long." He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I know we have known each other only 2 days," he said. "I know this is fast and probably foolish. But I need you to know that I have never felt about any woman the way I feel about you. You are educated and cultured and beautiful, and I am just a cowboy with nothing to offer but honest work and a good horse. But if you would allow me to court you properly, I would count myself the luckiest man in Dakota Territory." Elena felt something break open inside her chest, something warm and bright and wonderful. "You are not just a cowboy," she said fiercely. "You are brave and kind and good, and you have more honor in your little finger than most men have in their entire body. Yes, Wyatt. Yes, I would like that very much." He smiled then, a real smile that lit up his entire face, and Elena felt her heart turn over in her chest. Wyatt raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. The gesture was old-fashioned and courtly, completely at odds with his rough exterior, and it made Elena fall just a little bit in love with him right then and there. The storm broke on the morning of the 3rd day. Elena woke to silence and sunlight streaming through the cracks in the shutters. Wyatt was already up, opening the door to reveal a world transformed by snow. It lay in deep drifts against the cabin walls, pristine and sparkling under a sky of impossible blue. "It will be hard going, but we can make it to Custer by evening if we start now," Wyatt said, already moving to saddle his horse, a sturdy bay gelding that had weathered the storm in the small lean-to attached to the cabin. "Are you well enough to ride?" "I am well enough," Elena assured him, though in truth she was nervous about getting back on a horse after her last experience. But Wyatt was there to help her mount, his hand steady on her waist, and then he swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to hold the reins. "I have you," he murmured against her ear, and Elena relaxed back against his chest, feeling safe and protected despite the miles of snow-covered wilderness before them. The journey to Custer was slow and difficult. The snow was deep in places, forcing Wyatt to dismount and lead the horse through the worst drifts. But gradually they made progress, the sun warm on their faces despite the cold, and by late afternoon the small town of Custer came into view, its buildings dark against the white landscape. Catherine and Jacob lived in a small house on the edge of town, and when Elena knocked on the door, her sister answered with a cry of shock and joy. Catherine was pale and thin, clearly recovering from illness, but her strength was evident in the fierce hug she gave Elena. "We thought you were dead," Catherine sobbed. "The stagecoach station sent word that you had left before the storm and never arrived. Jacob has been organizing search parties, but the snow was too deep. Oh, Elena, thank God you are alive." Elena held her sister tight, tears streaming down her own face. "I nearly was not," she said. "If not for Wyatt, I would have frozen to death in the storm." She turned to where Wyatt stood on the porch, hat in hands, looking uncomfortable with the emotional scene. Catherine followed her gaze and immediately went to him, taking his hands in hers. "You saved my sister's life," she said, her voice breaking. "How can we ever thank you?" "No thanks needed, madam," Wyatt said quietly. "I did what any decent man would do." "You did far more than that," Catherine said firmly. She looked between Wyatt and Elena, and something knowing sparked in her eyes. "You must stay for dinner, I insist. It is the least we can do." Wyatt looked at Elena, who nodded encouragingly. "I would like that," he said. Jacob arrived home to find the house full of warmth and laughter. He was a solid man with kind eyes, a carpenter by trade, and he pumped Wyatt's hand enthusiastically when Catherine told him the story of Elena's rescue. Over a simple but hearty meal, Elena found herself watching Wyatt interact with her sister and brother-in-law, seeing how his natural reserve gradually melted under their genuine warmth and hospitality. When it came time for Wyatt to leave, Elena walked him to the door, suddenly reluctant to let him go. "When will I see you again?" she asked softly. "I need to get back to the ranch tomorrow, report in and make sure the cattle survive the storm," Wyatt said. "But I could come back to town on Sunday if you would like. Maybe take you to church and then for a walk." "I would like that very much," Elena said, feeling a flutter of happiness in her chest. Wyatt touched the brim of his hat, his eyes warm as they met hers. "Until Sunday then, Elena." She watched him ride away into the gathering dusk, and when she turned back inside, Catherine was waiting with a knowing smile. "So," her sister said, "tell me everything about this cowboy who saved your life." Elena felt herself blush, but could not keep the smile from her face. "He is wonderful," she said simply. "Catherine, I think I'm falling in love with him." Catherine hugged her tight. "I can see that, and I can see the way he looks at you, like you are the most precious thing in the world." The days until Sunday seemed to crawl by. Elena helped Catherine with household tasks, relieved to see that her sister was indeed recovering well from her illness. She met the other residents of Custer, a small but growing community of ranchers, miners, and merchants drawn to the Dakota Territory by the promise of land and opportunity. She also inquired about teaching positions and was delighted to learn that the town was in desperate need of a schoolteacher. But through it all, her thoughts kept returning to Wyatt. She found herself remembering little details about him, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness of his hands despite their calluses, the quiet strength in his voice. She had known him only 3 days, but it felt like she had known him forever. Sunday dawned clear and cold. Elena dressed in her best dress, a dark green wool that brought out the color of her eyes, and braided her honey-colored hair into a neat coronet. When Wyatt arrived, riding a different horse than before and wearing a clean shirt and vest, the look in his eyes told her the effort had been worthwhile. The church service was simple and heartfelt, held in a building that also served as the town hall and schoolhouse. Afterward, Wyatt offered Elena his arm and they walked through the snowy streets, their breath misting in the cold air. They talked easily, picking up conversations from their time in the cabin as though no time had passed. "I spoke with Mr. Henderson, the chairman of the town council," Elena said as they paused to look out over the white expanse of prairie beyond the town. "He said they would like to hire me as the schoolteacher starting in January. The last teacher left to get married in the fall, and they have been without since then." "That is wonderful," Wyatt said, genuine pleasure in his voice. "You will be staying in Custer then?" "Yes," Elena said, looking up at him. "I will be staying." Something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. Wyatt reached out and touched her face, his fingers gentle against her cheek. "I am glad," he said softly. "So very glad." They courted through the winter, Wyatt making the 15-mile ride from the Double Bar Ranch to Custer every Sunday without fail, no matter the weather. They walked together, talked for hours in Catherine and Jacob's parlor, and gradually fell deeper in love. Elena saw sides of Wyatt that she suspected few others ever witnessed. The thoughtful man behind the quiet cowboy exterior, the reader of dime novels who was embarrassed by his enjoyment of romantic stories, the musician who played his harmonica under the stars. Wyatt, in turn, discovered Elena's quick wit and fierce intelligence, her passion for teaching and her gentle way with children, her strength of character that had allowed her to survive that terrible storm. He told her stories of the ranch, of the spring roundup and fall cattle drives, of the vast and beautiful land that was the Dakota Territory, and Elena listened with eager interest, asking questions that showed she truly cared about understanding his world. In January, Elena began teaching at the Custer schoolhouse. She had 15 students ranging in age from 6 to 14, children of ranchers and miners and merchants, all eager to learn. She threw herself into the work with passion, creating lessons that were both educational and engaging, and within weeks, she had won the hearts of her students and their parents alike. Wyatt came to watch her teach one day, sitting quietly in the back of the schoolroom. Elena felt his presence like a physical warmth and found herself performing for him, drawing connections between mathematics and cattle ranching, between history and the settling of the West. When she dismissed the students for the day, Wyatt came forward with a look of awe on his face. "You are magnificent," he said simply. "Watching you teach, seeing how much those children love you, I have never been more proud to be courting someone in my life." Elena felt warmth flood through her at his words. "It means everything that you came to see me," she said. "Most men would not care about a woman's work." "Then most men are fools," Wyatt said firmly. He took her hands in his, right there in the schoolhouse with the last rays of winter sun slanting through the windows. "Elena, I know we have been courting only a few months, but every day I fall more in love with you. I want to wake up beside you every morning for the rest of my life. I want to build a home with you, raise children with you, grow old with you." He took a breath, his eyes intense on hers. "Will you marry me?" Elena felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, Wyatt, I will marry you." He kissed her then, a gentle kiss full of promise and tenderness, and Elena felt her whole world shift and settle into place. This man, this quiet cowboy who had saved her life in more ways than one, was going to be her husband. They were married in April, when the prairie was coming alive with wildflowers, and the snow had finally melted from the hills. The whole town turned out for the wedding, held in the same building where Elena taught, and where they had attended church together through the winter. Elena wore a simple white dress that Catherine had helped her make, with lace at the collar and cuffs, and she carried a bouquet of prairie flowers that Wyatt had picked himself. Wyatt stood at the front of the church in a new suit, his dark hair neatly combed, and when Elena walked down the aisle on Jacob's arm, she saw such love in his eyes that it took her breath away. They spoke their vows in strong, clear voices, promising to love and honor each other through all the days of their lives, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Wyatt kissed her with a tenderness that made several of the watching women cry. The reception was held at Catherine and Jacob's house, with neighbors bringing food and the town fiddler providing music. Elena danced with her husband under the open sky, feeling as though she were floating on air. Everything about the day was perfect, from the weather to the company to the look of absolute adoration on Wyatt's face every time he looked at her. As evening approached, Wyatt helped Elena onto his horse, and they rode out to the small house he had built on a piece of land 5 miles from town. The double-bar ranch owner, impressed by Wyatt's dedication and skill, had granted him the land as a wedding gift and the promise of continuing work. Wyatt had spent every spare moment of the winter and early spring building the house, a simple 2-room structure with a loft, but built with care and obvious love. "Welcome home, Mrs. Tanner," Wyatt said as he lifted Elena down from the horse, carrying her over the threshold in the traditional manner. Elena looked around the interior, seeing the furniture Wyatt had made himself, the curtains Catherine had helped sew, the little touches that made it a home rather than just a house. "It is perfect," she breathed. That night, they truly became husband and wife, consummating their marriage with a tenderness and passion that left Elena feeling cherished and loved in a way she had never imagined possible. Afterward, they lay wrapped in each other's arms, listening to the prairie wind and the distant howl of coyotes, and Elena felt a peace settle over her that went soul deep. "I love you," Wyatt murmured against her hair. "From the moment I found you in that storm, my life has been heading toward this moment. You are everything to me, Elena." "And you are everything to me," Elena whispered back. "You were lost in the storm and I became your hope, but you became mine too. We saved each other." The first year of their marriage was one of hard work and deep happiness. Elena continued teaching during the school months while Wyatt worked the ranch, tending cattle and horses, mending fences and breaking colts. They built their life together with determination and love, adding a chicken coop and a small vegetable garden, acquiring a milk cow and a litter of puppies from a neighbor's dog. In the evenings, after the day's work was done, they would sit on their small porch and watch the sun set over the prairie, Wyatt playing his harmonica while Elena sang along. Sometimes they would talk for hours, about everything and nothing, sharing their thoughts and dreams. Other times they would simply sit in comfortable silence, drawing comfort from each other's presence. Catherine and Jacob became regular visitors, as did some of the other ranch families and townspeople. Elena discovered that she loved entertaining, modest as their means were, and took joy in serving simple meals and creating a welcoming atmosphere. Wyatt, who had spent so many years alone, seemed to blossom in the warmth of genuine friendships and family connections. In the summer, when school was not in session, Elena sometimes rode out with Wyatt to help with ranch work. She learned to rope and brand calves, to spot a sick cow in the herd, to read the signs of changing weather. Wyatt taught her to shoot as well, both rifle and pistol, insisting that she needed to know how to protect herself when he was away. "The West is still wild in places," he said as he guided her aim. "I need to know you are safe." Elena proved to be a decent shot, though she hoped she would never need to use the skill. Still, there was something empowering about knowing she could take care of herself if necessary. Their first winter as a married couple was harsh, with heavy snows and bitter cold that reminded Elena vividly of the storm that had nearly killed her. But this time, she was safe and warm in her own home, with a husband who loved her and a life she had built for herself. When the wind howled and the snow piled high, Wyatt would hold her close and remind her that she was safe, that he would always keep her safe. In the spring of their second year together, Elena discovered she was pregnant. She told Wyatt one evening as they sat together after dinner, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "I am going to have a baby," she said simply, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. Wyatt's face went through a series of expressions: shock, wonder, joy, fear, then finally settling on a kind of fierce, protective love. "A baby," he repeated. "Elena, we are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, suddenly nervous. "Happy." Wyatt pulled her into his arms, holding her as though she were made of spun glass. "I am terrified and thrilled and more honored than I can say. You are going to make me a father. Of course I am happy." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring and summer. Elena continued teaching until the heat of August made it too uncomfortable, then spent her days preparing for the baby's arrival. Catherine, whose own first child had been born the previous year, was a constant source of advice and support. The women of Custer organized a quilting bee and presented Elena with a beautiful baby quilt, each square stitched with love by different hands. Wyatt became even more protective as Elena's belly grew, insisting she avoid heavy work and practically waiting on her hand and foot. Elena found it both endearing and occasionally frustrating, but she understood the fear beneath his devotion. They had both known loss, both understood how precious and fragile life could be. Their son was born on a crisp October morning in 1877, delivered by the local midwife with Catherine and Wyatt in attendance. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Elena thought she could not possibly continue. But Wyatt stayed by her side through it all, holding her hand and whispering encouragement. When the baby finally emerged, red-faced and squalling, Wyatt cut the cord with shaking hands and placed their son in Elena's arms. "He is perfect," Wyatt said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are perfect. Thank you for giving me this." They named him Thomas Jacob Tanner, after Wyatt's father and Elena's brother-in-law. He was a healthy baby with a good set of lungs and his father's dark hair, and from the moment Wyatt held his son, he was utterly besotted. Elena would wake in the night to find Wyatt standing over the cradle, just watching Thomas sleep, a look of wonder on his face. "I never thought I would have this," Wyatt confessed one night as they lay in bed with Thomas asleep between them. "A wife, a son, a home. I thought I would spend my life alone, drifting from ranch to ranch with nothing to call my own. You gave me everything, Elena." "You gave me everything too," Elena said softly, reaching across their sleeping son to touch Wyatt's face. "You saved my life that day in the storm, but you did so much more than that. You gave me a reason to live, a purpose, a love I never dreamed possible. We built this life together, and it is more beautiful than anything I could have imagined." The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and celebrations. Thomas grew from a baby into a curious toddler, then into a bright-eyed boy who loved following his father around the ranch. Elena returned to teaching when Thomas was old enough, taking him with her to the schoolhouse where he would sit quietly in the corner, already learning his letters and numbers by osmosis. A daughter came 2 years after Thomas, a sweet-natured girl they named Mary Catherine, who had Elena's honey-colored hair and Wyatt's deep brown eyes. Then another son 3 years later, a boisterous child they called William, who seemed determined to get into every possible kind of mischief. The little house grew crowded, so Wyatt added on 2 more rooms and a larger loft. The ranch prospered as well. Wyatt's skill with cattle and horses earned him a reputation throughout the territory, and eventually he and Elena were able to buy their own small herd and expand their land holdings. They would never be wealthy by any means, but they had enough, and more importantly they had each other. Catherine and Jacob remained close, their own family growing to include 4 children. The 2 families spent holidays and Sundays together, the children growing up as close as siblings. Other friends filled their lives as well. the community of Custer growing and evolving as more settlers arrived, and the territory slowly civilized. There were hard times too, of course. A drought one year that tested their endurance, a bout of scarlet fever that swept through the town and left Elena and Wyatt terrified for their children's lives, until the illness passed them by. There were the usual challenges of marriage, moments of frustration or misunderstanding that required patience and communication to overcome. But through it all, the foundation of their love remained solid and true. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Wyatt took Elena back to the line cabin where he had saved her life. It was still standing, still used by the Double Bar Ranch for winter range work, and with permission from the owner they spent an afternoon there, just the two of them, remembering those 3 days that had changed everything. "You ever regret it?" Wyatt asked as they sat by the fire in the same chairs where they had fallen in love. "Marrying a cowboy, living this hard life out here on the edge of civilization." Elena looked at her husband, seeing the lines that time and hard work had etched into his face, the silver beginning to thread through his dark hair, the strength and gentleness that still defined him. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for one single moment. This life, this place, you and our children, this is everything I ever wanted, even before I knew I wanted it." Wyatt pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that time had not diminished. "I love you," he said. "Every day I love you more than the day before. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Elena Tanner." "And you are mine," Elena whispered against his lips. "My cowboy, my love, my hope." As the years continued to pass, Elena watched her children grow into fine young people. Thomas, serious and responsible like his father, took to ranch work with natural skill, and eventually began courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher. Mary, bright and curious, developed a love for teaching that mirrored her mother's, while William's mischievous nature gradually transformed into a quick wit and natural leadership ability. Wyatt's hair turned silver and his movements grew slightly slower, but he remained strong and capable, still riding the range and working the cattle he loved. Elena's own hair developed threads of white, and laugh lines formed around her eyes, testament to years of joy and laughter. She continued teaching, becoming a beloved institution in Custer, educating 2 generations of children and watching the town grow from a rough frontier settlement into a proper community. They saw the Dakota Territory become a state, saw the coming of the railroad and the gradual taming of the wild land they had known in their youth. They saw changes, both good and bad, progress and loss, but through it all they had each other. On a warm summer evening in 1904, Wyatt and Elena sat on the porch of their expanded house, now a comfortable ranch home surrounded by outbuildings and corrals. Their children were grown, Thomas married with children of his own and running the ranch, Mary teaching in a larger school in Rapid City, and William working as a deputy marshal in Wyoming. Grandchildren ran through the yard, filling the air with laughter and shouts. "We have been blessed," Wyatt said, taking Elena's hand in his as they watched the children play. His hands were gnarled with arthritis now, but his grip was still strong and sure. "More than blessed," Elena agreed, leaning against his shoulder. "Sometimes I think about that girl lost in the storm, certain she was going to die. If someone had told her then about this life, about you and our children and grandchildren, about all the years of love and happiness, she never would have believed it. And if someone had told that lonely cowboy that he was about to find the love of his life dying in a blizzard, he would have thought they were crazy," Wyatt said with a soft laugh. "But here we are, 30 years later." "Here we are," Elena echoed. She was quiet for a moment, then said softly, Do you remember what you said to me in the cabin about how I became your purpose when you found me in the storm? I remember every word we spoke in those 3 days, Wyatt said. You gave me purpose too, Elena said. Not just by saving my life, but by loving me, by building this life with me, by being the kind of man who makes the world better just by being in it. You have been my hope, Wyatt, every single day since you found me in that storm. Wyatt turned to her, his brown eyes still warm and loving despite the years. And you have been mine, he said. Always and forever, Elena, you are my hope. They kissed then, a gentle kiss that still held the echoes of the passion and tenderness of their youth. Around them, their grandchildren played and the evening sun painted the prairie in gold, and in that moment everything was perfect. The years continued their relentless march. Wyatt eventually had to give up active ranch work as his body simply could not keep up anymore. But he remained involved in managing the operation, teaching his grandchildren the skills and knowledge he had accumulated over a lifetime. Elena retired from teaching at 70, celebrated by the entire town with a party that brought tears to her eyes. They grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They weathered the death of friends and loved ones, including Catherine, who passed peacefully in her sleep at 75, and Jacob, who followed her 2 years later. They celebrated the marriages and births of grandchildren and great-grandchildren, seeing their family tree spread and flourish. On a cold January morning in 1918, Wyatt woke in their bed with pain radiating through his chest. Elena saw the look on his face and knew immediately what was happening. She held him as the doctor was summoned, but they both knew it was too late. Wyatt Tanner, cowboy and rancher, husband and father and grandfather, died in his wife's arms at the age of 81, his last word her name. Elena buried her husband on a hill overlooking the ranch, in a spot where he could see the land he had loved and worked all his life. She stood at the graveside surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a legacy of love that would continue long after both of them were gone, and felt a grief so profound it seemed to hollow her out. But even in her grief, she remembered the joy. 43 years of marriage, of love and laughter and life shared. 3 children and 8 grandchildren and 12 great-grandchildren, all of them touched by the love story that had begun in a blizzard so many years before. A life built together from nothing, rich in all the ways that truly mattered. Elena lived 2 more years after Wyatt's death, years spent with family and full of memories. She told her grandchildren and great-grandchildren the story of how she met their grandfather, about being lost in the storm with no hope, and how a cowboy had found her and become her hope. She told them about the 3 days in the line cabin, about falling in love, about building a life together on the prairie. She wanted them to know, to understand that real love existed, that it was worth fighting for, worth believing in. On a spring morning in 1920, Elena Bradford Tanner died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 83. Her children buried her next to Wyatt on the hill, reuniting them in death as they had been in life. The headstone, a simple marker of local stone, bore both their names and a single line that one of their grandchildren had suggested, words that captured the essence of their love story. She was lost. He found her. Together they found home. The ranch continued under the stewardship of their descendants, and the story of Elena and Wyatt became family legend, told and retold through the generations. The line cabin where they had fallen in love eventually collapsed from age and weather, but the spot where it stood remained special to the family, a pilgrimage site of sorts for young couples just starting their own journeys. And sometimes, on winter nights when snow fell heavy and the wind howled across the prairie, People swore they could hear the sound of a harmonica playing a sweet, melancholy tune, and see two figures walking hand in hand through the storm, forever together, forever home. The love story of Elena and Wyatt Tanner became woven into the fabric of Custer itself, a reminder that even in the harsh and unforgiving landscape of the frontier, love could bloom and flourish. Their story was exactly what love should be, a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection, a commitment that lasted through good times and bad, a bond that death itself could not truly break. For Elena had been right all those years ago in the line cabin. Wyatt had saved her life, but she had saved his too. They had saved each other from loneliness, from purposelessness, from lives half-lived. Together they had created something beautiful and lasting, a love that would echo through time, inspiring generations yet unborn. In the end, that was the true miracle. Not that Wyatt had found Elena dying in a blizzard, though that was remarkable enough. The true miracle was what they had built together afterward, the life and love and family that had sprung from that chance encounter in the storm. They had taken a moment of desperation and transformed it into a lifetime of hope. And that, perhaps, was the greatest testament to their love. That from the worst moment of Elena's life, lost and freezing and certain of death, had come the best thing that ever happened to either of them. That Wyatt's inexplicable urge to ride out into a killing storm had led him to his soulmate, the woman who would share his life and heart for over 4 decades. Their story became a testament to the power of hope, the importance of following one's instincts, and the transformative nature of love. It reminded everyone who heard it that even in our darkest moments, salvation might be just around the corner, that the person meant to share our life might appear when we least expect it. That love, real and true and lasting, was worth believing in. The town of Custer grew and changed over the decades, from frontier settlement to modern community, but some things remained constant. The schoolhouse where Elena had taught, though renovated and expanded many times, still stood and still bore a plaque honoring her decades of service. The church where she and Wyatt had married still held services every Sunday, and the hill where they were buried together overlooking the ranch remained a peaceful spot where their descendants came to pay respects and remember. Their great-great-grandchildren would sometimes visit that hill, standing by the simple headstone, trying to imagine what it must have been like back then in the wild days of the frontier. They would think about their ancestors, the schoolteacher from Ohio and the cowboy who saved her, and they would feel proud to carry their blood, to be part of the legacy they had created. The story of Elena and Wyatt Tanner was one of those rare tales that transcended time and circumstance, speaking to something universal and eternal in the human experience. It was about connection and hope, about the power of one person to change another's life completely, about the beauty that could emerge from the most desperate circumstances. It was about being lost and being found, not just physically but emotionally and spiritually. About two people who were incomplete separately but whole together. About building something lasting and true in a world that was often harsh and uncertain. About love as a choice made daily, through challenges and joys, year after year, until death itself marked the end of one chapter but not the end of the story. For stories like theirs never truly end. They live on in the hearts and minds of those who hear them, in the descendants who carry their blood and their values forward, in the very land where they lived and loved and built their lives. Elena and Wyatt Tanner's love story became part of the history and mythology of the American West, as real and enduring as the mountains and prairie that had witnessed their devotion. And on winter nights, when snow fell on Custer and the wind howled down from the Black Hills, people would tell the story again. About the schoolteacher lost in the blizzard with no hope, and the cowboy who found her and became her hope, and how together they created a love that would last not just a lifetime but generations. A love that proved that even in the hardest of times and places, the human heart could find its home. That was the legacy of Elena and Wyatt Tanner, a legacy not of wealth or fame, but of love and family and devotion. It was a legacy that reminded everyone who encountered it that the best things in life often come from the most unexpected places, that heroes exist in the quiet courage of everyday people, and that true love, when nurtured and cherished, could withstand anything the world threw at it. Their story was complete, full circle from that desperate day in the storm to the peaceful end of their lives together, and it stood as a testament to everything good and true about the human spirit, about love, about hope. It was a story that deserved to be told and retold, remembered and honored, because it represented the very best of what we could be, what we could build, what we could mean to one another. She was lost in the snowstorm with no hope. The cowboy found her and became her hope. And together, they created something eternal,